Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Vegan Proteins, Muscles by Brussels Radio. My name is 𝐃𝐨𝐬𝐿.
And I'm Danny.
And this is our 84th episode. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode. We hope you enjoyed the last one. I personally...
It was so fun. Yeah, thanks so much to everybody who sent me nice messages. It happened to come out like on my birthday, I think, which I was not planning for. Wanted to just pretend it wasn't published. So thank you so much for the people who sent me nice messages. I really did appreciate it. It meant a lot to me to hear that so many other people related to it, I guess, for better or worse. So thanks, guys.
Wait, how did I not even know that I published it on your birthday? That's crazy. I had no idea. Interesting coincidence. Whew. So we've been keeping busy as usual, but still having some fun. I actually traveled down to New York City to finally get a chance to meet my nephew. Little wee bitty. He's like, I don't know. He was like 35, 40 days old. But in typical me fashion, I surprised my family because that's just what we do. And I didn't tell him I was coming. So all of a sudden, I'm at the front door and I ring the bell and my mother answers because she was watching the kid. And she's like 2 feet away from me and she's just in shock looking at me. I'm like, you don't recognize your own son? But I think I just scared her because she didn't even realize it was me. But anyway, it was just so cool getting to hold this little child after not being able to be there for when he was born and whatnot because COVID and all that. But anyways, it was nice to be traveling for personal reasons for a change. It's nice to be traveling in general. We haven't done much, if any of that, the past couple of years. But as I feel like we've mentioned on previous episodes, we've definitely talked about it, we are going to be out and about again on tour with 𝐸gan_strong. Honestly, I'm not even too sure exactly what our schedule looks like, but you're the tour manager. Why don't you give me a heads up on where we're going?
We're going to a lot of places. The first place we're going is Salt Lake City on the weekend of April 23rd and 24th for the Salt Lake City FitCon. The weekend of the May 21st and 22nd is the LA Fit Expo. Weekend of June 11th and 12th is the FitCon in Texas. And then 2 weeks later, the 25th and 26th of June, that is San Jose Fit Expo. And then there's more, but I'll leave it there for now.
What do you know about FitCon?
It's a fitness expo.
Okay, all right. I don't know why I assumed it wasn't fitness specific. That was a weird assumption of mine. I heard the word con, and my mind immediately went to Comic-Con for some reason.
Which con stands for convention, fitness convention.
I did not know that.
Oh boy.
It shows you how much I think ahead. Sometimes I just do not think ahead at all. That's honestly going to be the theme for this year with how much travel and how much we got going on. Sometimes you just got to roll with it. It's going to be fun though. I'm really looking forward to getting back out there and hanging and hopefully meeting a lot of you in person. Okay, what are we talking about today? I felt it would be interesting to open up the topic of progress, but not like what progress looks like. Well, yes, actually what progress looks like, not how to make progress, but how to assess progress. So in other words, getting the right kind of feedback for your coach or for yourself, in my opinion, is pretty important. It's not only pretty important, it's essential. It doesn't matter how hard you're working. If you can't assess your feedback, you're going to wind up being short-sighted as far as what kinds of decisions you make on what to do. And then the other problem is, well, you start to worry. Am I getting results? Are these the right kind of results? What should I be looking for? So that's what I want to get into today, Danny. Well, I think the easiest place to start is to think about what kind of data to collect on yourself and how to collect it. And the easiest way to explain this, and of course we'll get more granular with it, is to consider taking pictures of yourself to measure progress and to consider taking measurements of yourself to measure progress.
I'd flip-flop that. Measurements first. Measurements way first, because yes, pictures can tell a great story, and also people are terrible at looking at pictures of themselves and assessing anything. That is what I have found. So pictures are great if you're going to be sending them off to your coach, but I literally will tell my clients when they take their progress photos, don't look at these. Don't even look at these. Don't even worry about these at all. Let me look at them, because I know that when they look at them, they are not going to see the same thing that I see.
That's very true. I think I still do want to get into pictures a little bit because I feel like it's worth learning how to assess progress there. But I agree with you in the fact that it's much harder to analyze, and there's a lot less objectivity that can go into the mix when you're looking at pictures. Like it's really hard to have your feelings not get away with you body image wise. And that, speaking from someone with a lot of experience looking at and assessing one's own pictures.
Well, that's what I kind of want to start with, I guess. If we're going to talk about gauging progress, I think we'd be silly to not at least touch upon the fact that people are notoriously bad at gauging their own progress. Just human beings in general, not good at telling how they're doing. We are often our own worst enemies. We pick ourselves apart. We're able to find the flaw in every situation, and that makes it really hard for us to determine when we need to make changes to our programming, to our diet, whatever, in order to keep progress moving. And this is why I personally think it is so important to have a coach, or so important to have some guidance, eyes over your shoulders. And this is why when I compete, I have a coach. It's not because I don't know how to do the thing that I need to do. This is what I do for a living. I know exactly how to do it, but I also know that I could have a bad day and catch myself in the mirror from a certain angle and be like, yep, we got to cut calories, when that could be the absolute worst thing that I could do. So coaches have coaches, their coaches have coaches, their coaches have coaches. Why? Why are so many people dropping coin on having coaches? Because they realize the value in having them, and they realize that they are not infallible and that they are likely to make not so great decisions when it comes to their own progress. So I just want to lead with that first.
Okay, fair enough. And I agree. I do think it helps to get you out of your head, even when you know what you should be looking for, when you have someone else that does this for a living and they know what to look for, and they're not you. And yes, they're investing in your progress, so there could be some subjectiveness there, but their goal is to also be honest with you if you're working with someone who's a good coach, and to give you the right kind of feedback so that you know what you're working with when you're seeing changes in your body, or when you're not seeing changes in your body, and the reasons why. But okay, not everyone is going to have the time or necessarily even the money to work with a coach. And so my question is, what kinds of things can someone be on the lookout for if they want to learn how to assess results when looking at their picture side by side?
I think if you're in a position where you have to coach yourself, the data that you collect, like you started talking about, it needs to be as crystal clear as possible. It cannot be subjective, which is why, yes, pictures are a good thing to have, but that is not where I would start. I would start with the scale weight. I would start with circumference measurements of your waist, your navel, your hips, your thighs, your glutes, your arms, your chest, etc. Because while yes, there can be a little bit of a margin of error there, depending on, if you're not practiced in measuring yourself, it's going to be a much clearer picture than, does this photo look better or worse than last week? Is 38.5 higher or lower than 38? That's a much easier question to answer. So I would always start with those, assuming someone's goal has anything to do with their physique at all.
Mm-hmm. And I do feel like the midsection measurements in particular are the easiest ones to gauge, because generally speaking, when they're moving up or moving down, there's an obvious trend. You're usually either gaining or losing body fat, whereas the other measurements aren't as easy to pick apart. Like you could be cutting, for example, and think that you're losing muscle, but then it's like, oh no, you're losing water because carbs hold water and carbs get stored as glycogen around your muscle. So like you're depleting, for example. So you're not losing muscle per se, but
Or you're losing body fat.
yes, but again, they're not. I feel like the other measurements can mess with you and they can be harder to judge, I guess is what I'm thinking.
What do you mean by other measurements? I'm confused.
Arms, thighs, for example.
I think it's super important to measure those things. I would absolutely measure those things as well. The navel and the waist measurements, yeah, those are gonna change faster. And generally speaking, if it's going up, you're gaining body fat. If it's going down, you're losing body fat. But if you are bloated or have your period, it's also going to go up, and that can kind of mess with you. So having those other measurements, I think, is really important. Also, when somebody's on a cut, a lot of times I'm looking for things like their bicep measurements or their calf measurements, for example, to stay the same while their navel measurements go down. So sometimes we'll see that on a cut, sometimes we'll see that on a build or a body recomposition phase, and that is, to me, that is as cold, hard proof as you're going to get that, look, you are losing body fat while maintaining your muscle, or sometimes losing body fat while building your muscle. If your navel and waist measurements are going down and your biceps and calves are staying the same or increasing, like you are in good shape.
Yeah, those are some good points. Another point that I want to add is to expand on your thought of the measurements not going up or down in a linear fashion, like your waist and your navel, like depending on whether you're on your period or you're bloated or whatever. And that makes me think of, okay, well, people get hung up on analyzing the data as they collect it. Like if you measure yourself every week, you're going to start to analyze yourself every week. It's just what we do. It's human nature to look at what you're journaling. You want to look at your measurements over, like, say, a 3 to 4 week trend, 1. And 2, you want to become aware of how your body fluctuates, even when you're not looking to gain or lose. And I feel like keeping track of stuff, even when you're not actively trying to cut or gain, even when you're at maintenance, it could be helpful because you can know, oh, okay, my body weight usually fluctuates plus or minus 3 pounds. My midsection measurement usually fluctuates by a half or an inch, and it's this one, it's my navel, for example, or my waist. Some other things I would recommend being aware of when you start to measure is to try to measure in the same place every time. Also be aware that as your body changes, sometimes it might impact where you measure on your body, but in general, try to measure in the same place every time. If you ever catch yourself trying to measure more tightly on your body, or that could be a thing because you want to see progress, and that can just be honest with yourself. Like, hey, I'm a coach and a professional here, and I've done it with myself, right? And then I just say, okay, well, I'll just measure tight every time. But like, don't even go down that path. Like, if you want to see results, don't force them. Don't try to manipulate them. Just let it happen. If you don't see what you see, you have honest, accurate data. Like, don't try to tighten the measuring tape around your body, for example. And you might be surprised, like, that you're aware of it and just disillusion yourself in doing it.
I would also say you want to make sure you take any measurements under the same conditions every time. So you don't want to be measuring your waist like at different times throughout the day. You would want to measure it after you wake up, after you go to the bathroom, before you eat or drink anything. That's when you should be taking your weight, your circumference measurements, and any photos that you're going to take. You always want to take them under the same conditions. So I think 𝐬𝐿𝐵 was going to talk about pictures.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot more time to learn how to analyze your pictures. I think it takes a lot of practice, actually. And it's one of those things that it's a learned skill. You don't just get it right away, and it can be challenging, but I feel like it's worth analyzing your pictures. The easiest thing to do is to start with getting the right kinds of shots. I recommend setting up a camera equidistant and from where you are, every single time, like Danny said, control the variables and make it the same every time. So you stay in the same spot, you set up the camera in the same spot, and take a video. Take a video so that way you don't have to worry about taking the perfect shots every time, and just you can take screenshots from your video and get, what I recommend is 4 shots, front, side, rear, and then the other side. And here's the interesting part, and you see it, I would say in like 75% of clients, when they take pictures, they pose their body in such a way where they want to see certain things change. Like they'll have their arms raised, or they'll have their body twisted, or they'll be in a flattering pose with their posture or whatever. Progress photos, you want to be as relaxed as possible. You want your body completely relaxed. I feel like it's the best way to analyze things side by side. You have a look on your face like you want to say something.
Yeah, I disagree.
Let's hear it.
I mean, I think if it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is just to, improve your physical fitness a little bit, sure, that's fine. Stand relaxed. But if I'm working with a bodybuilder, or if it's me, you are never going to find me in a truly relaxed position. You are always going to find me in the exact same 4 poses: a front relax, side relax, rear relax, and other side relax, which, by the way, in bodybuilding has nothing to do with actually being relaxed at all. They're these horrible, awkward positions to get into. But if you've ever seen any of the progress photos that I've posted, I'm always in those poses because they're repeatable. I've done them so many times that they're incredibly repeatable to me. And I know for a fact that you also take all of your progress photos in those positions.
Not 100% of the time, but I do like your point and agree with you that those repeatable poses are helpful in that regard, and they're also helpful in the sense that you can see what your body is looking like in the way that you want your body to. How do I say this? When you step on stage, you're going to be posing, and it helps to see your progress as your body's changing in those poses. So as a bodybuilder, yeah, totally take pictures in your bodybuilding poses for sure.
But also, let's just say your goal is to have your biceps grow. You're not going to be able to tell from a picture of you standing there all relaxed and limp if your biceps are growing. You are going to have to flex your biceps to see if they're actually growing. So all of this comes back to, what is your goal? Depending on what your goal is, you might not need pictures at all. If your goal is to be able to run a mile without getting winded, who cares what the pictures look like? So before you even start trying to assess progress, you have to determine what your goal is and what measurements will indicate whether you reached that goal or not. So if your goal is to have your biceps grow, taking measurements and photos of your flexed biceps is going to tell you if it's growing or not. But those would be completely ridiculous measurements for somebody who wants to improve their 5K time.
Fair enough. And we could pick this apart for days when it comes to progress photos and measurements, because there's just so many different scenarios as far as the athlete, the client, the individual, and what you're looking for and what you want to keep track of.
But I think it's an important point to bring up because, we get messages in our DM boxes all the time that are like, hey, what should I eat post-workout? Or what kind of workouts should I do for blah, blah, blah. And my response is always going to be, well, what is your goal? Like, that's always the question. So, regardless of what you're talking about, whether it's training, nutrition, progress, etc., the first question should always be, what is the goal? So, sorry if that seems like semantics, but I think it's a really important distinction to make.
I do want to get into paying attention to the stress that your system is under and how that can be a marker of progress, and also what to do. I feel like that's really important. And I think there are 2 obvious ones. There is the stress and fatigue from training, and there's the stress and the fatigue from diet. Why don't we start with training fatigue? Training fatigue. When do you know when you are running hot? Oh gosh, this is a hard one because I feel like we deal with a lot of overachievers and a lot of pushers, And I think when it comes to fitness anyway, you're usually just trying to do as much as you possibly can. And so it's hard to like be like, I am overly fatigued, or I am running with a lot of fatigue in my system. I think the safest thing to do would be just deload, but now I'm getting off topic. How do you assess your training fatigue? Well, I feel like in the beginning, right, it's obvious. Your body's super sore, you need to rest, no brainer. But then eventually, DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, is not really a thing, and you have to pay closer attention to how your body's responding to training. We could think about how your body feels in the gym, for example. If you're having a hard time beating your book, you could be really advanced at your training, but you could also be a little too fatigued. So in other words, if you're repeating your working weight and your sets over and over and over again for like 3, 4, 5 weeks, and you're not on some sort of like, I don't know, competition prep, chances are your fatigue is pretty high. So that's just like one example of something to look out for. Did you have any examples?
So I guess that when it comes to training fatigue, it's kind of like 𝐬𝐿𝐫 said, the more advanced you get, the less obvious it becomes. It's not like an immediate action and consequence like it is when you first start training. You squat for the first time, the next day your legs are sore. This makes perfect sense. As you become more advanced, it's not a direct response in the same way. You could find things like you are having a harder time waking up in the morning, or you're more sluggish throughout the day. You could find that psychologically you are not excited to go train the way you were a few weeks ago. You could find that weights that felt kind of easy last week are much harder this week, or like 𝐬𝐿𝐫 said, you're just not progressing past them week after week. You may find that you're starting to get like little nagging injuries more often as well. And all of these do point to fatigue coming from your training, or at least it could be coming from your training. If you find that you're not able to hit your desired rep ranges, if you find that you're having to cheat your form more often, you're probably doing too much. And it's tough because the whole like gas model in fitness, or general adaptation syndrome, means that you have to push your body sort of past what it's good at in order for it to adapt and grow and progress. But you can absolutely push your body way too far past that, and then your body cannot grow and adapt. So it's a really fine line you have to walk up. Is this training stimulus enough to get me to progress, but not so much that I'm going to be in this fatigue hole and cannot progress? And once you're in that fatigue hole, until you seriously deload or change your programming, and sometimes deload for multiple weeks, you are just going to keep digging and digging and digging yourself into that hole, and you are not going to come out.
And I think it's possible that you wind up moving in that direction despite your best efforts. I think you're less likely to when you take the ideas and you put them into action, like the feedback that Danny just recommended looking out for in your system. But I do feel like that's a consequence of trying to continue to adapt to doing more. Like, you may get to a point where you're running so hot, whether it's for competition reasons or whether it's just because you're advanced and you're trying to advance even more. And that's why we run things like recovery blocks, where sometimes you do a training block that lasts for 3 months or lasts for a short amount of time, like 4 weeks, depending on how under recovered you are.
I don't think 4 weeks is a short amount of time. I think deloading every 4th week is... Am I misunderstanding you?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. I'm not referring to deloading. I'm referring to running a training block that's less intense, like a recovery block.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Deloads are things to program in regularly. I'm with you there. And you can be proactive and just say, hey, the more years I train in a row, the more often I have to deload. And I should deload regularly no matter what. I think that's a safety mechanism. I think there's no foolproof method here when you're continuing to focus on progressive overload, especially when your goals are extreme. So my other thought here is like longer term solutions. When you find yourself in that fatigue hole that you're mentioning, which is a scary place to be, it's still not the end of the world. It's a hard sell. You could sit there and blame yourself. Oh my gosh, how can I do this? It feels so awful. What do I do now? Maybe even an injury ensues and you're recovering on that. That's a very, very frustrating place to be. Tell you what, you're probably going to be there at some point in your life if you make this a long-term goal of yours to be fit and active for years and decades on end. Something like a recovery block can be a hard sell. But if you do something like where you taper down your training for as much as, say, even 4 to 6 months, it could actually put you in a position where you could once again continue to focus on your long-term goal to continue to get more and more aggressive results. So that's my thoughts on that. As far as the feedback goes, Danny's feedback is gold. All of that I would recommend. I don't really even know if there's too much else to say. I think you ran the gamut on that one with what to look for to know that your body's under stress. I think it's a matter of journaling that, checking in with yourself, telling your coach about these things. You know what I feel like is hard with coaches and the feedback from clients, Danny? When clients don't want to tell you that they're hurting because they think you won't push them as hard. You ever get that?
Yeah, of course I get that. And that's, I spend so much time trying to build like this open and honest line of communication with people because, no one wants to disappoint their coach. Like nobody likes that feeling. I've certainly done it. And no one likes to show up and be like, hey, so this sucked this week. But sometimes this sucked this week and it's important to talk about it because then we can make appropriate changes to the training program. And a lot of times it has nothing to do with the training program. It has to do with a variety of other factors. But yeah, showing up and saying, hey, this was a lot harder of a training session than I expected it to be, or I don't know what happened, but this week, this weight just felt so much heavier than it did last week. Sometimes it's just a fluke. Sometimes you just had an off training day, and the more advanced you get, the more off training days you're going to have. They're not all rock star sessions, but sometimes it's a pattern and we can recognize, okay, we are starting to get ourselves into that fatigue hole a little bit and we need to deliberately back ourselves out of it right now in order to keep moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. And to build that trust, I tell clients like this is good feedback because it helps us program responsibly for you. It's not a sign of weakness or it's not you whining. It's not anything like that. You could probably hear our cat in the background. I think he wants in. He may have to very well take over this episode, Danny. Let him in.
He's been trying to this whole time.
Xander has something to say, everybody.
He's back.
And he's back.
Boss kitty. He's going to jump on this table. It's going to make a big old sound.
That's okay.
There it is.
Anyways, yeah, honest and open feedback when you're in pain, hurting. That's not whining. That's giving us the ability as coaches to assess how your body's responding. And so we know exactly what we should be doing when we make adjustments. Anyways, speaking still on the topic about stress, what about your diet and how to know how that is affecting you outside of your tracking and outside of your meal planning, right? It's one thing to think about your macros and what kinds of foods you're eating and are you eating whole foods and healthy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How is your dieting down or eating up playing out in your system, right? When you're eating more, obviously, and the goal is performance, if you're not feeling more energetic in the gym, for example, then you're not reaching your goal. So like just being a machine and saying, oh, okay, I should be eating more because I want to gain, not enough. You want to make sure that you have more energy in the gym. You want to make sure that you're recovering better. You want to make sure that you're feeling full and satisfied after meals, like stuff like that. Or not just full and satisfied, but almost to the point where you don't really want to eat everything that's on your plate, but you know that you enjoy a nice big hearty meal and that it's going to give you energy for the next workout, for example. and your recovery should improve. Your lift you should be getting stronger when you're eating up for gains. On the contrary, and I think this one is a lot more complex, when you're, say, dieting down, those kinds of diet stress signals are way different. And again, in the similar vein of like, you're doing yourself as a service if you're afraid that you're whining and that's why you're not being open with your coach. This is going to sound kind of crazy, but we want to be aware of like when you're suffering, when you're hurting, because that means that usually you're making progress. Like your body's uncomfortable, and so you're probably burning off your energy stores.
Let me interject here. So I was going to say, if, never consider that like you're whining. Sometimes someone will say something to me and they'll be like, hey man, this was tough this week. I was actually, I was pretty hungry this week. And my response will be like, that's pretty normal for what your goal is right now. There's nothing off about that particular thing. But sometimes people are like, I felt like I needed to take a nap in the middle of every day. I could barely wait for my next meal. I was absolutely like famished by the next meal. And I said, okay, that is beyond where we would like you to be. So I think what 𝐬𝐿𝐫 is trying to say is not like we're looking for you to be suffering because that means you're making progress. No, we're looking for the right degree of discomfort to ensure that you're making progress. There is a right degree with the training like we talked about, but also with the diet. When you're trying to build muscle, you are sometimes going to be uncomfortably full. It's not always going to be super pleasant. And when you are dieting, you're going to be hungry sometimes. It's not always super pleasant, but it can absolutely go in both directions where it's just too much. It's too much for us to get the results that we're looking for. And that's why it's important to be able to talk about those things. And if you don't have a coach, be able to assess for yourself. And again, this is a spot where I feel like most people are not very good at it. They either cut themselves way too much slack. And at any trigger of any discomfort at all, they're like, I have to listen to my body. This can't be right. I must always listen to my body. And it's like, buddy, your body doesn't want to change. I don't know what to tell you. Like, good practice if you've never done it. But if you're trying to change your body, you're going to have to not listen to it 100%. So there are people who cut themselves way too much slack. And then there are also the exact opposite. These people would like run on a broken ankle, because they believe that's what they need to do to not be a wimp, is they need to push through all of the pain and fatigue, and success is on the other side of tremendous suffering. And it's like, well, that's not true either. So it's a super hard thing to gauge for yourself. Again, this is why it is so helpful to have somebody else helping you. Because think about how hard that is to gauge for yourself. Think about how many times you probably question that every day. Like, oh, it's not quite lunchtime, but I'm a wee bit hungry. It's like, well, that's okay. We'll just listen to our body. And you're like, ooh, should I listen to my body? I don't know. Maybe I should just try to wait it out a little bit. Or, the other side of that is like, oh my God, I am freaking starving for lunch, but it's not for another 3 hours. And it's like, well, tough it out, you sissy. Like, should you be toughing it out? It's hard to answer these questions for yourself. And sometimes it requires another human being saying, hey, this is normal. This is what we expect. Here are some things you can expect to happen. Here are some red flags that we should probably look out for. Please report back to me with any of these things. And it's nice to have another human being give you permission sometimes to sort of feel a certain way and go with it.
Without relying on something that's just written on paper that you're following just because you purchased a template from somewhere, or it's a formula that you can use as a guideline. Like, I think that's where you start, and then you start to put this feedback into place and implement changes based on how your body's responding while you're encouraging it to move in a direction it doesn't want to move in. Yeah, it's also an important distinction to make that no matter where your body's at, it's going to want to stay there, whether it's in an unhealthy place, whether it's in a sort of healthy place, wherever it is, like, your body's going to want to stay there. Whenever you take yourself out of a state of balance, there's discomfort, right?
Yeah, and it's just hard, you know? I don't want to make it sound like every program that's written as a one-off program is bad. They're not. There are some great programs out there. We have some programs out there that I think for a program that someone can just download and do, I think they're pretty fantastic. But any program that you can just download and do is by its very definition going to lack the nuance of your day-to-day life. It's going to lack the context of the things that you are feeling. So, you know, the less personalized a program is, the more self-aware you need to be.
Another thing that I feel can be so much more, that you can get so much more value out of it, people just don't assess feedback on, is checking their form. I don't just mean mirror checking. I don't just mean asking a gym partner. I mean finding a way to really analyze and assess your form. I mean, there are simpler things you can do, like pay attention to how you're moving, like, oh, focus on the positive, focus on the negative, focus on the full contraction. I feel like that's how it starts as you're learning how to move safely and like understand what it feels like to go through a movement pattern. But then after that, I think it's actually good to start paying attention to your tempo, for example. Like, how much time are you spending on the positive and the negative, as well as like, are you implementing hold? So stuff like that, I think, helps you assess how you're moving to make sure you're moving well. But you can get a lot deeper into this. I mean, what are some of your thoughts on form assessment?
As far as progress goes, because I guess that's my question, is like, what about this has to do with progress and assessing it? I guess if you're assessing the progress of your lifts, your form is super, super important. One thing I say to a lot of my clients is there are quite a few exercises that you can always be improving. Your squat, your deadlift, rows, bench press, overhead press. These are exercises that, yeah, you may know how to do them, but you can always get better. You can always tighten up the form on things. You can learn to assess your RPE, your rate of perceived exertion, or your RIR, which is reps in reserve. You can get better at that, and that can make you a better lifter overall. I do think taking form videos is really, really important, and it's one thing my clients do not send me enough of. It's like, I need to see you move.
You need to see you move. You think you're seeing yourself move while
true.
You're in motion in the mirror, but you're also paying attention to how you move to make sure that you're doing the lift. When I spin it that way, it gives the lifter a better understanding about their ability to critically think about their lift and learn about how they're moving and know how to change it. You can't be aware of yourself while you're moving, not completely aware, right? So having that video analysis and then looking at yourself after the fact, super helpful.
Oh yeah, so many times I've been doing a lift and it feels like I'm doing it a certain way, and then I watch the video and I'm like, ugh, we could fix that. Or sometimes it's the opposite. Some set feels like death, and then I watch it and I'm like, that actually looked pretty easy. All right, maybe that wasn't as hard as I thought that it was. So yeah, it's one of the downsides to online coaching is that we're not there with people in the gym. So those form videos, they really, really matter, because you can be doing an exercise incorrectly or not in an optimal way, and it almost can make it like not even worth your time. If you're doing the exercise wrong, you can actually be regressing, not progressing.
Mm-hmm. And I think that there is some feedback that even with having someone in person, you can't get unless you video yourself. Yeah, it's nice when someone can stop you mid-lift and physically adjust you and cue you, and also right after the lift say, hey, this is what I saw, try it this way, and then they watch you again. I think there's body awareness that can happen there that you cannot get with video analysis. But that being said, you're relying on someone else's cues and someone else feeling their way through the lift with you. For you to be able to actually see what's happening, having that cold, hard proof right in front of you, this is how I'm moving, you'd be surprised on how it helps you accept what you are doing and be able to make a change and improve upon that lift. So I don't think that there's any substitute, honestly, to video analysis when it comes to assessing form.
Another type of progress that I feel like is not on this list is your mental progress. And by this, I mean trying to find some way to measure if your relationship to your body is improving, if your relationship to food is improving. These are other areas that people can make progress in. For example, I have a client who is a top level bikini competitor, pro level, fantastic. And one of the things that she worked on in this off season, this building season, was being less obsessed, less anal about tracking every single macro in the off season, where that wasn't really necessary for her to make the kind of progress that she wanted to make. So, a lot of times we would think of progress as being more diligent and more specific. And for a lot of people, that is true. But sometimes you need to look at where you need to make progress, and it might not be where you expected. It might be that you need to loosen up a little bit around certain areas in order to be a better athlete.
Yeah, very true. And I think the more that you pay attention by getting feedback on yourself, the more you stand to be aware of what you're doing, which means you're more likely to make some changes. So even when it might feel like, oh, I'm maybe paying attention more than I need to, or seeing the negative here is doing more harm than good, but honestly, there's just no substitute for you getting the right kind of feedback on how you're doing, diet-wise, training-wise, mentally, whether or not you have someone else to talk through it with, like a coach, for example, which, by the way, I can't stress enough, I agree with Danny wholeheartedly. If you're putting the work in, you may be doing yourself a disservice if you don't find someone to do the work with you so they can make sure that you're... There's been so many times where I've seen someone put in so much time and effort into something and they don't get the results that they want because they just didn't think through it. They just kept pushing and repeating and pushing and repeating. And I feel like that's what this episode's all about, is making sure that you don't just push and repeat. You know what you're doing so you have a more desirable outcome, more results.
All right, moving on to our question and answer segment. Here we go. This one's for you, 𝐬𝐝𝐾. I would love some insight here. I need help figuring out my macros. Any calculator I use says I should eat around 2,200 calories to lose weight, but I recently just went from 1,200 to 1,700 calories and I gained 2 pounds this week. I'm 42 years old, female, 197 pounds, and 5'11". I don't have a day job, but I am training in the gym 4 days a week, weight training, and do 20 minutes of cardio 4 days a week. I will also add that my clothes are fitting better. I know the scale isn't the best way to measure my success on this path. However, I am 20 pounds overweight, so I figure I still need to drop some weight. Can you help me?
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts here. When you tell me that your clothes are fitting differently for the better, that tells me that you're putting on lean muscle. And part of that is going to result in affecting where the scale goes. You did say that you have more weight to lose, and I suppose I could understand why you may want the scale to go down, but I wouldn't want you to focus so hard on making sure the scale eventually goes down that you sell yourself short in regards to putting lean muscle on, because lean muscle will improve your metabolic capacity. Lean muscle will improve your bone density. You'll feel stronger. You'll look different. Your clothes will fit different. And you can arguably lose body fat while you are gaining muscle. As far as the changes in your calories are concerned, calculators, you take them with a grain of salt. There are so many variables that calculators just simply cannot take into account. You keep a food journal on yourself and you make changes calorically, and then you can see what's happening with the rate of change and how your body's responding to the said change that you're making. Calculators can definitely give you some guidelines: age, lifestyle, what you've done in the past, your genetics as far as how your metabolism responds, how much muscle you have on your frame. Have you dieted in the past couple of years? What are your stress levels like? What is your activity outside of your cardio and your training? Are you walking a lot? Are you sitting at a desk most of the time? There are your hormones. Like, there are so many variables that can play a role here that it is not possible to rely on a formula and a calculator and use that as your gauge and your measure exclusively. It's more of a guideline. So I think you're doing the right thing by keeping track of what you're doing and noticing how things are changing. And my thoughts, again, here are not to force the body fat loss to the degree where you'll lose your opportunity to put lean muscle on, because that, as you can see, is changing your shape. As far as like calories to stick to, if you find that you don't like the way things are going, like if your clothes are fitting differently but not in the right way, and you maybe want to slow that process down a little bit so you have a chance to put more muscle on instead of moving in the wrong direction, then just taper back the calories ever so slightly. But 1,200 is a very low number. I think that's the most important point here. 1,200 is super low. Your metabolism can be, it's not like your metabolism is going to be damaged. I don't like to use the word damage. It can be suppressed. It can be suppressed for a temporary period of time if you're under eating. Your body will adapt to how much you're eating, and it'll take a couple months for you to be able to adapt to eating more. That's not to say that you can eat 22, 25, 3,000 calories. Like, point is that your metabolism can down-regulate by as much as like 15% just because you've been under eating. So your metabolism upregulates, you get a little bit of a boost, and then you can tease things and even eat a little bit more to make sure you focus on muscle gain while still losing body fat at a reasonable rate. This question's for you, Danny. What's the best way to deload? I'm following a workout plan that currently has 4 weeks of the same exercises. 2 of those weeks are deloading. On the deload weeks, should I choose lighter weights and do the same reps and sets, or should I choose the same weight and do less reps and sets? For either option, though, what is a good rule of thumb for the amount you decrease, either in weights or sets and reps?
So this was a question that actually came through us in our Muscles by Brussels Facebook group. And my answer was that, this person was following a program that somebody else wrote. I assume that they paid money for. It should be outlined in the program exactly how to deload. So keep that in mind. Any program that you're using should explain all the variables to you: how to deload, why to deload, why 2 out of the 4 weeks are a deload. So I didn't write this program. I assume that the person who wrote the program had a reason, and they probably had a method. They should probably have explained that, but they did not. So I hesitate to tell somebody on a program that I don't know anything about how to deload. But in general, when I have my clients deload, it's a pretty straightforward formula where we cut 1 set from everything, lift at the low end of the rep range, and lift 80% of the weight that we lifted the week prior. So if someone did 3 sets of squats at 150 pounds in an 8 to 12 rep range, during a deload, they would do 2 sets of squats at 120 pounds for 8 reps. That would be how I would have them deload, and they would do that for every single exercise. But every coach is different in the way they program. But if you are paying somebody for information, you should have all of that information. And that is the take-home point here. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Vegan Proteins Muscles by Brussels Radio. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You can email us, coach@VeganProteins. And if you have not yet signed up for our 5 Keys to Vegan Fat Loss Masterclass, that is going to be on March 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And the link to sign up for that free class is in the show notes below. Once again, thanks so much for tuning in, guys. My name's Danny.
And I'm Giacomo.
And we will talk to you soon.